Welcome back to Sledgehammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. Now, today I am joined by the amazing Tim Trashmouth Mills. Tim, how you doing today, man?
Good, man. How about you?
I'm doing very well. I'm so excited to do this with you. We are both fans of a lot of the same things, whether it be horror movies, metal, hardcore. Like, we grew up pretty much the same, man. Before we talk about why you're here, though, Tim, I want people to get to know you a little bit better. Like I said, you are a huge fan of horror movies, and you do your podcast, Horror Flicks and Guitar Picks. Now, I stumbled upon your podcast, and I was like, damn, this is fucking dope. I really want to work with this guy. But what can you tell people a little bit about the podcast that may not have heard you before?
So pretty much, well, first of all, thank you for the kind words, and then also thank you for having me on the show. But
Yeah, man.
it's an honor. No, pretty much the podcast is just me interviewing musicians about their favorite horror movies, and it's kind of broad. When people hear that, sometimes they think we're like talking a specific horror movie every episode, but really it's kind of like general questions, like what's some of your favorite horror movies, your relationship with them growing up, and try to make some hypothetical stuff in. They tell me horror stories of their own and stuff like that. So every now and then I'll have like a guest from the horror world, like an actor or director or composer or something like that, to kind of break up the monotony as well. So, or a podcast guest, or YouTuber and stuff like that. So
That's awesome, man. And it's always fun to be able to listen to other people's perspective on horror movies. And that's what I love about this community. A lot of people don't feel the same about movies, but a lot of people are mature enough in this community to still get along with each other and still have a good conversation about a movie they may not enjoy very much. So the good thing about the podcast is, though, guys, you don't have to go far to find it, because not only do I have the podcast, but I have all of Tim's social media links right down here in the description. So make sure you're subscribing to the podcast. Make sure you're following him on social media so you can stay up to date on everything that he has coming up. So I do want to ask you, so obviously you're a huge fan of horror movies. You're a huge fan of metal. You interview a lot of musicians about their favorite horror movies and such. Are you a musician yourself?
yeah, I actually used to play in a band like probably close to 10 years ago now. It doesn't feel like it. Time flies once you're out of high school and shit. But so I used to play in a band just locally in North Carolina called Isolationist. We played in Virginia a little bit and stuff like that, but we never went really out of those two states. But that's kind of where my creative outlet was going for a long time. And then when that kind of ended, that's when it kind of led to podcasting eventually and stuff like that. And the world that I was in, I knew it was kind of easy to get in touch with a lot of those guys, musician wise and stuff. So that kind of is what led to molding the two worlds for the podcast. So,
well, and I try to explain this to people because I played music in bands from the time I was 13 until I was about 23, 24. And podcasting and being in a band is so close to being in the same world. You're always networking. You're always trying to go out and find places to play or people to interview. You're always playing shows with people or interviewing people. Like the way that podcasting is, and that network of trying to get a hold of people and work with people, they're so in tune with each other. So I feel like that's almost a natural progression for a musician to go from doing, playing music to podcasting. And I think it's a lot of fun because you have that creative outlet that you can go into after that. So have you ever thought about playing music again in the future?
Yeah, that's the one good thing about the podcast is I don't have to rely on other people. And that's the one problem about the music thing, is that it's just hard to find musicians where I'm at. And then the musicians that you do find are kind of busy with other bands. And, pretty much once everybody hits their 30s, they pretty much have time for like one band and that's it. So with a podcast and a 2-year-old and stuff like that, I don't really have much time for a project. I wrote a small EP like a year ago and recorded some music, but I might not do anything with that. I might, if I find the right guys eventually, but it's not something I'm trying to pursue, but I definitely wouldn't say no to the idea of it for sure.
Sure. And I think setting up for a podcast is a whole lot easier than loading up for a show, man.
Yeah, hell yeah. Yeah, just turn this thing on and check the Zoom settings pretty much, and then good to go.
Yeah, you don't got to set up your double bass. You don't got to get your amps all set up. Everything's just good to go when you're doing a podcast. Man. You don't got to haul it everywhere. Well, so you guys know now what Tim has going on now and in the future, and you can stay up to date on the things he has going on in the future by following him on social media and subscribing to the podcast by clicking the links below. But now, Tim, I want to go back to the past. In order to have a podcast that is horror related, horror had to start for you somewhere. So let's go back to the past here for a second and talk about what got you started in the horror genre, your first horror movie. And Tim, the first horror movie that you watched was?
Mary Lambert's Pet Sematary from 1989.
I just got to say, what an amazing film.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes Dead is better, man. I fucking love this film. Do you remember about how old you were the first time you had seen Pet Cemetery?
Well, that's the thing about like my first horror movie is I wish I had that, memory that a lot of people have of like, oh, I sat down with my grandma or like this and that. But mine for me it was my mom was a big fan of like Stephen King, and like so she read his books. Like she was a big reader of them, like that type of fan, not really of the movie adaptations. Like of course they came
Nerd.
as she got older and stuff, but she was scared of like horror movies, so she never really wanted to watch like a bunch of them, but she would watch the Stephen King adaptations. And so growing up, I knew that like my first, like I'm not sure which one was exactly my first one. I knew it was either this or the It TV series, which I absolutely love that as well, with Tim Curry and everything. And then Tommy Lee Wallace is such an underrated director, obviously, Halloween 3. So, but I went with Pet Cemetery because like I said, I wasn't sure if it was either Pet Cemetery or It. But I feel like Pet Cemetery probably left a little bit bigger impact on me as far as like scenes that really just stuck with me, and just overall film. You know what I mean? As much as I love it, like I said, I just never. My mom was a collector of ceramic clowns, and I could. And like when I tell people that, they're like, "What the hell? How'd you like live in that house?" But it kind of like led to me never being scared of clowns because she just had them all over. So
Sure.
I think that's why it didn't really like stick with me as like far as being scary as much as Pet Cemetery did.
Right. And it's funny because these movies are so much more connected than we give them credit for. Like you obviously have the big kid death in them.
Yeah.
And the thought of this monster from the afterlife. You don't get much of it in Pet Cemetery, but there is a monster behind what's going on in that film. And we know you watched it with your mom. We know you were quite the wee lad when you seen it for the first time. Do you remember which scene it was from Pet Cemetery that affected you the most?
Oh, definitely. It was Zelda on 100. Like the way that they teased her throughout the film, like already had me on my, the edge of my seat. Like I don't want to see her anymore. And like when she dies, you think that's it. But then when they bring her in at the end and she's like literally teasing her and she's like, Rachel, Rachel. That, oh my God. I felt like I heard that it come out of my closet every night for at least a few weeks for sure.
Never get out of bed again. Never get out of bed again.
Yeah.
That's yes, dude. And it's funny, like that scene to me is so impactful. When we do our Sledgehammer top 10 videos or our franchise ranking lives, that's one of the scenes that's in the intro to the video because that's how much that this was my Pet Cemetery was my wife's first horror movie. So this is a movie that's very special to me because of what it means to my wife. And this is a scene that we always talk about because it's such an impactful scene. When most people talk about Pet Cemetery, you get Gage getting hit by the truck. That's the big scene that you have. Which again, I get it. That's a scene, no matter what, like you're like, fuck, this is crazy.
Now that I'm older and have a kid, it probably hits harder now. But we rewatched it the other day and Zelda still was creeping me out. And I'm like, as much as I've seen, it still hits. So yeah, I'm with you.
It's such a phenomenal moment. It's an underrated horror moment to me, in my opinion. I think that's a very, very scary moment. So we know which scene affected you the most from Pet Cemetery, and this is just an overall dark movie, so this is a hard question to ask. But what's your favorite scene from Pet Cemetery?
It's probably when Gage kills Judd, just because of how like brutal it is for him being a 2-year-old kid and stuff like that. He slices his Achilles, then he cuts his mouth. That's right, but then he bites his neck, and when he's biting on his neck, I was like, everything else could have been done with like a doll hand, but that part, I was like, they had little Miko Hughes freaking biting something. So I was like, that right there was pretty brutal. But
I love how practical that scene is. Everything in that scene is practical. There's no CGI. It's everything is done practically. From like you said, Miko Hughes biting the neck out. You see him bite and rip the meat. Like it looks so good. Even when you watch it today, this is a movie that really holds up. And I've always said that Victor Pascal is one of the fucking best anti-heroes of all time because he is scary to you as a kid. He really is trying to do the right thing and trying to save this family because he tried to save him. So I do like the idea of Victor Pascal, and that's a scene that's always stuck with me. Anything with Victor, that's my segue here. Remakes, requels, sequels, that's kind of all the rage. Yeah. Did you see Pet Cemetery 2019? And if you did, what were your thoughts on that film?
I saw it once, and it was like after its theatrical run. I can't remember. I think I watched it on like VOD. I rented it on that or whatever. But I didn't love it. I liked the ending, the bleakness of the ending, where it was where pretty much at the end they were all zombified or Pet Cemeteryified and coming out to get Gage. But overall, the whole film I feel like is just kind of forgettable as a remake. I feel like it falls in with like The Fog with Tom Welling or Prom Night with Kristen Bell. It's like I feel like in 10 years, like you'll really have to drudge up that memory of this film where some of these other remakes really stand out, like Suspiria and um, I can't think of any more. Oh, well, like Hills Have Eyes was a great remake, as well, to go back to that one and stuff like that. So there's a bunch of great remakes, and I even like Texas Chainsaw from '03, but this one I feel like just kind of fell as just a little flat for me.
Sure. And that's fair. See, I've grown to really, really enjoy this remake. And I do want to say to everybody, if you haven't seen it, I do have the alternate ending link down here in the description as well. The alternate ending to Pet Sematary 2019, which I feel is far superior than the theatrical ending. That's very rare that I like an alternate ending more. But I do have that alternate ending down here in the description for you guys. And Ashley and I do a segment called Versus, where we talk about an original and a remake. And I felt the way you did, going into it. I was like, I remember a little bit about it, but not much. And at the end of the remake, I was like, wow, this is so much better than I remember it being. I think I went into it with the scope of don't even think about the OG. Just think strictly about this as its own movie, as if I had never seen the OG. And it made me appreciate it a lot more. The big thing that was missing from it, though, was Victor Pascal. Victor Pascal does not have a huge role in the remake like he does in the original, and he's just something that haunted my dreams for the longest time as a kid. So we talked about, Tim, your first horror movie being Pet Sematary and what that movie means to you. But now, my friend, my little buddy Ghostface is here, and he has a question for you. What's your favorite scary movie, Tim? What is your favorite horror movie of all time?
Ironically, it's actually Scream, wearing the hat and everything. No, that's just, it was one of those films that I do remember the first time I saw Scream. Like I said, I said in my 30s, but I'm exactly 30 now. So when it came out in 96, I was only 4, so I didn't actually see it, then. But I remember watching it in the year 2000 because I remember seeing Scary Movie first and then sitting on my dad's bed watching Scream in the middle of the day one time and being like, whoa, they really copied this. I was like, this is like Scary Movie if it was serious. Like, because at that point I was 8 years old. So it was just, it really threw me for a loop, just see like how much Scary Movie had copied it, because I was such a fan of that. But which is crazy because to me, I feel like Scary Movie kind of did for parodies what Scream did for slashers. It really revived it that year. So no, Scream's just my favorite. It's got so much rewatchability and stuff. So, but I'm definitely like one of those people. I got like a locked in top 5, so I could But
see, I get it, dude. It's funny because everybody shits on the scary movies, man. I fucking love like even up to part 3, like when the one where they're making fun of the ring. Cindy, the TV's leaking. Like it's so funny, man. That movie's so good. Like the first 4 scary movies to me are awesome, man. And I could talk about those all day long because they're just like Airplane. Like that type of spoof humor where you got these serious actors that are playing it so serious, but they're just saying and doing the goofiest shit imaginable. And that to me is the best type of spoof movie that you could possibly have. So, but also Scream, how iconic is that movie? I mean, it's still to this day where we'll be getting another sequel. We all know that we're getting Scream 6 or Scream ! Whatever the hell they're going to call it. Ghostface Takes New York, whatever the hell they're going to call this movie. But it's one of those things where it's very rare to have a movie going into its 6th chapter and everybody still being over the moon excited about it. Even though we're losing our OG final girl for this film, she'll be back for the 7th one, I'm sure. But the impact that Scream has had in the horror community, I don't think that can be understated. So for that to be your favorite, I don't think I've got a tattoo. I went to get a Ghostface tattoo when I was younger, and the artist talked me into getting the actual Scream tattoo by Edward Monk. So without Scream, I wouldn't have that piece on my arm, man. So I very much respect the choice. So Tim, we are almost at the end of the 3rd act. The credits are about to roll and the curtain's about to drop. But before that happens, I have one last question for you. We're going to bounce back to Pet Sematary. And what we're going to do is rank this on a skull count. Now, we're not ranking Pet Sematary on acting, production, score, nothing like that. What we're doing here is strictly ranking this movie on how much it affected you on your first viewing. So 0 skulls being not effective, 5 being extremely effective. You can use half and quarter skulls anywhere in the middle. What would your ranking of Pet Sematary be?
I'm going all in 5 skulls, mostly because when I was young, I was horrified of horror movies. Like even in '99 when Idle Hands came out, I was terrified. Like I couldn't finish it. I was so scared and stuff like that. So
Love that movie, man.
it's one of those now that like it's one of my favorites. You know what I mean? I'm a huge Devon Sawa fan. You know, just everything he's done. You know, even the recent film he put out, Hunter x Hunter, was amazing. So and then of course he's in Chucky and stuff like that now. But no, this is just one that really stuck with me. Like you said, even Pat, like I didn't really mention it myself, but Pascal, like that was one that I was worried about waking up and him being beside my bed, because that scene alone when he's like in the doorway is just so horrifying. There's so many iconic and horrifying scenes in this film, from that one to Gage dying to Gage coming back to all the Zelda stuff. It's just, plus we didn't mention it, but the iconic main accent that Herman Munster's putting on the whole time when he's just saying road. Like I think this movie clocks the most time that the word road's definitely used, that's for sure. And then or the like just the little freakouts and stuff that he has, like when he asks him if the body's ever been buried in there, and he just like starts hitting the beer over and stuff like that. And then of course, like you find out later he's lying that there's a body and stuff. But no, this movie just definitely stuck with me. It's introduced me to, you know, it was my introduction to Stephen King as well as horror movies. You know, and Stephen King is iconic and stuff like that. All the stuff he's done, you know, I love most of those adaptations and stuff. So no, definitely 5-scholar for me.
And I do love that moment when you have him sitting at the table.
Christ on his throne, no.
That part is so good. Or even like when you first have him saying,
Sometimes that is better.
that's such an, oh my God, like one of the best lines of any movie ever, man. And something that we didn't talk about either. Like we talked about, and I bring this up a lot, you know, watching the movies as a young man, as opposed to, I'm the father of 3 kids. I have a 14-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 2-year-old. And a scene that really fucks with me, man, is when they're at the funeral and Lewis and the dad get in the fight, and he pushes Lewis and he hits the coffin and it falls over, and you see Gage's little body in that coffin, and then they get in the fight. I would murder somebody, legit bite their throat out, Rick Grimes style, if they came to my funeral and tried to fuck with me at my kid's funeral, man. So like as a kid, you're like, ooh, that's bad. As a dad, you're like, what the fuck, man? Like, I'm burying my kid today and I got to deal with your ass on top of it. Like, oh, dude, no. What great film. And there's so much about this movie that we could go on for hours talking about, because I could do a deep cut on all the amazing things that happen in this movie. But, you know, I know that you have other things to do, Tim. So I do want to say once again, thank you so much for taking time out to come out and hang out with me. Everybody else, don't forget, there are some links in the description that need your loving. So make sure you're subscribing to the podcast, following Tim on social media so you can stay up to date with everything he has coming up in the future. Tim, please don't go anywhere. I got a couple more questions for you. Everybody else, as always, keep talking horror, stay what you are, and we'll see you guys soon.